In 1984, some 21 TRs lined up on the grid at Alton Park for the very first round of the TR Register Race Championship. There were lots of TRs racing in the early 1980s in various championships and formulas, all trying to emulate the successes of the great Reg Woodcock, who regularly beat Astons and Porsches with his trusty TR. The years the years of the racing championship within the TR Register, they ceased in 2006, but during that time saw many epic battles. Steve Hall versus Pete Cox in 1986 in their TR4s battled all season. Reg Woodcock himself entered and won in 1985, and other champions included Mick Richards, Chris Connolly, Richard Wright, Colin Pendle, Joe Henderson, Rob Cowing, Bert Smeets, Graham Miller and John Wolfe, with Mike Hughes being the only driver to race in every season. In 1983, the Southern Sprint and Hill Climb Championship, which had been running since 1976, was adopted as the TR Register Sprint and Hill Climb Championship, and the very first name on the trophy that year was the man who still supports it now, Neil Revington, and this championship still goes from strength to strength, and under the stewardship of Roger McEwen, last year enjoyed its largest ever entry list. So to talk about how TRs and the TR Register influence motorsport, please welcome to the stage Mike Hughes, Steve Hall, Neil Revington, Roger McEwen and Darryl Uprichard. And also, I haven't seen him yet, but if John Sykes is in the audience, if he can join us as well. He's not here. Didn't think I saw him. These then are our motor racing stars of the TR Register, ladies and gentlemen. We are in great company here. You can sit down, you can stand up, whatever you like, whatever you feel more comfortable doing. Next to Steve, I think we all feel small. Let's start with you, Darryl. Let's talk about how the TR Register Race Championship came about.
Before the race championship, I think some TR owners will recognise that when you first get your TR, it's usually about socialising and polishing it. But that does wear off with some of the men and ladies. And then we want to do auto tests, which is a little bit more spirited, with a bit more competition. And then it's sprints, which is even more competition. And then ultimately, it's racing. So the register, at its inception, hadn't got anybody who had, as far as I'm aware, a competition license. And I had been associated with the Alpha Owners Club sprints at Goodwood for probably a couple of years before the register was formed. And I didn't actually compete in any of their events, but I went and spectated, because Goodwood was a circuit which I enjoyed and was near my home. So after we had got over the Thames Valley Group and we started polishing our cars, we decided that we wanted to do perhaps something competitive. Now, I know we ran autosports at Brentford Market, and the later groups, the Trent group, certainly ran a number of autosport events up in the Derbyshire area. But to get a sprint at Goodwood was something which, well, as you know the history of Goodwood, you know how important it is today, and it still had that sort of charisma even in the early 1970s. However, you could only sprint at Goodwood about once a month because of the noise regulations, and there was a huge outcry from locals if decibels were exceeded, etc., etc. So the regulations on noise and inconvenience to locals was tight. Anyway, I started to put together some paperwork that I had to obviously submit to the RAC, because the RAC are the governing body of motorsport in the UK and still are. And I noticed that the Alphas all started their cars one at a time with 10-second intervals, so that there was no racing on the circuit, really, unless there was a very slow car being caught by a second car. But as the cars were graded by their speed, it was always the fastest cars that went first, so the second car would never catch it, and so on. So there was never very much chance, unless there was an accident or someone went off, that cars would be racing against one another. And sprinting is about time and not sort of door-handle to door-handle battles. Anyway, I thought I would run a sprint, and we could get 4 cars on the front row, and we'd all start together. Of course, that's strictly forbidden. Well, I know that now, but I didn't really accept it. I knew it at the time, but I didn't accept it. I was, of course, acting on behalf of the TR Register, and Alan Robinson was the secretary, and I was left to negotiate with the RAC. And I was negotiating with Les Needham at the time, who controlled motorsport at club level in the UK, and I put in my submission for the sprint at Goodwood, and I said I was going to start cars. I think I backed off from 4 and said 3 at a time. And he wrote back and said, not a chance. You cannot, that's a race, you can't do that. And there were a couple of letters of which I've still got, went backwards and forwards. And in the end, I thought, oh, sod this, bugger the RAC. I'm going to run the event because we all wanted to race. So I ignored the RAC, and we went ahead and we ran the first sprint in May, and we started 3 cars all at the same time. There were fortunately no accidents. We did all our own scrutineering, all our own marshalling. It was completely closed to the club. But what, I suppose I should have known better, but what I didn't realise was the RAC sent an observer in plain clothes. and stupid, yes, that's what I said. And the club got a letter, a very stern letter from the RAC, calling me and Alan Robinson to Belgrave Square, to the headquarters of the RAC, to a court, to explain ourselves as to why we had run an illegal competition. And Alan and I had to go, and we both went. And I can tell you, it was quite intimidating. It was a dark, traditional courtroom, sort of wood panelled, I remember. There was the very large person sitting at the end, who I guessed was the chairman, who said nothing. And there was little weaselly Les Needham reading out all the offences that Alan and Alan kept saying, well, it wasn't me. Alan and I were facing, and of course the club was facing a serious situation, because they said that if we were found guilty of running an illegal event, which I think was a foregone conclusion, we could be banned from motorsport at all forever from the club, and we would be fined. Anyway, I'm only telling you this because some of it's a bit amusing. Les Needham starts to say, Mr. Uprichard and Mr. Robinson, we usually record these for, like these telephone, for training purpose and all this rubbish. Although he didn't say it like that, but he said, we'd record these proceedings. Have you any objection? And I said, yes, I object. And the big man at the end, who I couldn't see his face, said, overruled. So, and that's just how it went. We were fined, and we were, I don't know whether the letters are still on file, but they probably are. Anyway, I then had to run a sprint. Obviously, we ran a second sprint, and that was in accordance with RAC rules. And from then on, of course, we started to look towards the TR Register Race Championship. And when I was considering the race championship, I was then racing against Reg Woodcock in the Aston Martin Owners Club Thoroughbred Sports Car Championship. I mean, there wasn't a race between me and Reg. Reg was 1 lap ahead of me at the end of the event. But he was a very successful TR racer at the front of the grid, faster than most of the Astons. He was very, very competitive, and he's never really been eclipsed. But it was Reg that inspired me. And I mean, I was going reasonably well for a TR, but of course it also inspired other TR members, and we decided that we'd try and run a championship. But we just didn't have enough cars because, of course, all the members who were going to run in the championship had to have race licenses, and it wasn't all, you had to put in a bit of time and money to do that. So I was also racing against a very good friend of mine, sadly passed away or was killed in a racing accident, called Dennis Welsh, and he had a very competitive Austin Healey 3000, and there were a number of Healeys racing in the Aston Martins Club, and I asked Dennis whether to allow the register to have a full grid, whether the Austin Healey Car Club would join us on the grid and be part of our championship for the first year, which would give us the strength to carry on. And he agreed, so therefore we started a championship, and tomorrow if you want to visit the stands where there is lots of memorabilia, there's pictures of all the people getting their awards, but on the first year, sad to say, Dennis Welsh won the championship. So, well, I was glad in a way. I mean, we were all very friendly. It was a good start, and from then on, yes, obviously other people have taken over, but that's really the start of the motorsport movement in the TR register. Thank you.
Thank you, Darryl. We'll talk about the Sprint Hill Climb Championship in just a moment with Neil and Roger. But Mike, you take the mic and tell us a little bit about what it was like to run that championship through until its last round in 2006. And some of your highlights and memories. I can imagine going to America with the fleet of cars was amazing. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, I was involved from the start competing, and I was on the drivers' committee with Darryl. As Darryl said, initially there wasn't a great response from the TR members to form our own championship, so we invited the Healeys. It quickly became apparent that they weren't needed, because by the end of the first season we'd got full grids just with TRs, so that system only lasted for a year. I took over the running of the championship and the competition side in 1988, I think it was, 88, 89. By that time, in the sort of early 90s, we were really in the golden years. We used to have over 80 people registered for the season, and probably 70 would come out during the season. It was a fantastic time. Steve was running. Steve won the championship the very first year, although Darryl said Dennis won the overall. Steve won the TR championship, and I was 1 point behind him. The second year, I was on level with points with Reg Woodcock, but I made a stupid mistake at Donington, which cost me the championship. Anyway, that's another story. So anyway, I said the golden years in terms of registrations were the late 80s, early 90s. Some of the most memorable things were certainly, I think from my point of view, in 98, we were asked by the Dutch TR group if we'd like to come over to Zandvoort with a round of our championship. There was one or two Dutch people racing, several German drivers as well at the time, and we could invite them as additional entrants to sort of bolt up the entry. Anyway, again, we didn't really need the other people, although the Dutch team had invited us. They put on a fantastic weekend for us, and we managed to take, I think we took 23 cars over the first year, and that involved quite a lot of planning, going from various routes. I think we had 3 different routes. Even one or two of the people drove the cars over to Zandvoort and raced them as they were. I can remember that. So we went, that was 98, and that was on the circuit at the time. Wasn't the original Grand Prix circuit at Zandvoort, which they hadn't used for a number of years. It was a slightly shorter version, but it was still very exciting. And then I think 99 we went again, and 2000, and we still had over 20 TRs that went over with us. And by that time we were running on the full Grand Prix circuit, which of course for next year, I think it is being introduced into the F1 calendar again for the first time. So that was quite exciting. And then another time, Wayne just mentioned about America. In 2002, we didn't try and take the championship over there, but we had an invitation from the American racers as they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the TR2. And they'd held a race, I think, every 10 years, I think the 40th certainly, but this was 50th, like ours this weekend, the big event for them. So they wondered if we'd like to bring some of the UK cars over. And so there was no problem in getting volunteers. It was a question really of keeping the numbers down, because certainly we weren't going to run them onto a ferry and then drive them off at the other end, as the race was in mid-Ohio, which is about 500 miles from Newark, where the boat comes in. So one of our guys had a friend who had a container. And so a 38-foot container, we managed to convert this container to take 8 cars. Having said that, we had by that time let the Spitfires and GT6s in. So there was I think 1 Spitfire, there was 2 TR7 V8s, 3 TR7 V8s, a TR6, 2 TR6s, and I think 1 early car. Anyway, we took 8 cars, and then we all went over. We all flew over, obviously, in various ways. Somebody went over with the container and onto the ferry, and then the party I went with, we flew to Cleveland. We got motorhomes, drove to the circuit, which is about 90 miles, and then we said to the Americans, well, they said, "How are you bringing the cars over?" I said, "Well, bringing them over in a container." "Well, how many?" I said, "1." "1? 8 cars? You must be joking." Anyway, there was a problem at the customs, not with the fact that there were 8 cars in there, but there was some delay. And the people that went with the container and on the ferry had forgotten to change their phones over, and we couldn't contact them, they couldn't contact us. So all the drivers, bar a couple, were at mid-Ohio with no cars. Somebody else had gone, I think, and gone to the wrong circuit. He turned up late as well. So we had no way of knowing when they were going to arrive. But the race meetings in the States are not 1-day or 2-day affairs. They start on a Thursday and they finish on a Sunday. So there was plenty of people arrived there, and we were telling them how they were going to get there. No, I don't believe it. Anyway, I think it was on the Wednesday evening, really late. They saw the container coming over the sort of the top of the hill into the paddock, and immediately as it stopped, the majority of the American drivers, and there was 48 cars I think entered for the race, were sort of milling round just to see, how these cars were going to be loaded, because they'd actually loaded them in stages. I think there was 3 at the back, and then two. I can't remember exactly how it's done. Anyway, they were just amazed. The cameras came out. They were taking photos, taking videos. It was a fantastic time. The only trouble from their point of view was they'd invited us. They put on loads of hospitality. There were special events for us. Cass Kastner was there, of course, as he always is. And in the race, I think we had 8 cars. 1 retired, which was a Spitfire. And we finished 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 8th, 13th, and that was about it. But they were quite relaxed about that, the fact that we'd taken all the silverware. But it was an absolutely fantastic time, and certainly one of my highlights of my time in the register.
Well, Mike, you ran the TR Register Race Championship so well for so long, and you were on the committee when I joined way back in 2007 now. So for all that Mike did as well, big hand, please. Mike Hughes. Steve, you were instrumental in developing your TR4, of course, racing amongst all of these guys in the race championships, but you also rallied as well, another aspect of motorsport for TRs. And of course, your famous co-driver Aggie is here as well. Some highlights from your rallying days and how it led to TR Enterprises, of course.
Yeah, I think there's a little story before that, though, and I know we all want to be a little bit brief, but I would just like to say how good it was as a youngster. Because when I got my TR, unfortunately, I must have got ripped off. I had to pay 600 quid for my TR. But anyway.
Extortionate.
Is the mic on?
It is. Just hold it nice and close.
Oh, yes. Right. So the register was very instrumental in me getting started in motorsport, which was really good. The very first event I did was run by the club, and it was a 12 car running from the Franklin services on the M5 of all things, and that was in 1979. And then I went on to do, as Darryl mentioned, various sprints and hill climbs, of which I've just returned. I did 3 sprints and hill climbs last year, having never done any since then. And then on to the was it the Historic Sports Car Club, Road Sports, which is where I met Mike.
Right.
And also got introduced to Darryl and various other people. So I was very keen to enrol and race in '84. So I think it's quite important that the TR Register did do a lot of work, and the encouragement from my local group, which was Trent Group. I was very fortunate to have Trent Group, and there are a fair number of members here tonight. And the amount of encouragement was amazing, and help with the car, because I didn't have TR Enterprises, not for some time, and that was very, very good. But yes, I've gone on to other things. I always wanted to rally, but I have to tell you that I found that a slightly cheaper option was certainly sprinting and racing, and eventually came back to rallying a little later on. I did try modern stuff, but
Of course, TR7 V8 for a while as well.
and the V8. So special things that happened, I suppose, was finishing third overall on the historic RAC rally, and winning the Ulster and winning EPA. And I did go back and win EPA in the TR8 as well, so a little bit of a follow-on from Mr. Pond's times out.
Absolutely.
But it was quite a difficult car to drive. But mainly just a big thank you to all those people who helped me on my way.
And Steve, another round of applause for the fact that Steve has managed to build a business in TR Enterprises and actually retire, which is not heard of very often, but you're enjoying your life up in lovely Scotland now, I believe.
I've got a different restoration project on now. It's a house.
A house, excellent. But the TR is still in the garage, which was finished first. Two of them, brilliant. Steve Hall, ladies and gentlemen. Neil Revington next, who, as I mentioned, was the first name on that cup for the very first Sprint and Hill Climb Championship run by the TR Register. And thank you so much, Neil, for continuing to sponsor the Sprint and Hill Climb Championship into modern times. And it's doing better than it ever has done. What are your memories of the early days of Sprint and Hill Climbing in the club?
Well, as Darryl said, it was a bit of a cock-up to start with. I remember that Goodwood event when we got our knuckles severely wrapped. But for me, it started a little bit before with an auto test at Heston Services, where you could just, like the people that organised it, just set off, or rather cordoned off a portion of the car park and just ran an auto test. And I had no idea what was going on. Turned up with my TR2, and people turned up with VWs and things and put the tyre pressures up to 60 psi, and they got all these ball tyres out the boot. And so I had a go, but I had no idea what I was doing, and it turned out to be a lot of fun. And so the idea of driving the car quickly became a clear thing that I wanted to do for the future. So, started off in the Hill Climb and Sprint Championship, being the Southern Sprint and Hill Climb Championship to start with. But it was all very gung-ho. And in fact, we put some, in preparation for this weekend, we put a few photos on our website of which I dragged out of early days. And I've got some photos of us lining up at Goodwood. And we're there, all we just did was turned up with a crash out that we sort of used to use on our motorbikes. And it was sleeves rolled up, there was no suits. And you just had to go and went as fast as you could on the tyres that you'd driven to the circuit on at the time. It was mostly actually circuits rather than hill climbs to start with, and it was later when it became our own Sprint and Hill Climb Championship that the hills became just as important and became a series in itself.
And of course, from there, you personally went on to do some incredible international events like the Targa Tasmania. Do you think the stuff that you did in the club in those early days gave you the grounding for those big ticket events that you later went on to?
Yeah, no doubt about that. It would be certain to say, probably for all of us who've competed, that we didn't know bugger all about how to drive when we first started. We just sort of got out and had a bit of a go. But when you do actually take part in hills and sprints, the one thing that you learn straight away is that if you don't get off the line quickly, you've just lost.
Yeah.
So actually being able to control the car straight off the line is the important thing that you learn doing hill climbs and sprints. And taking that forward, I just found that from time to time there were other events that you could do, whether it was doing trials, which became quite an amusing thing to do in a Dello and in the TR, and then rallies, whether they were long distance rallies like the Pirelli Marathon, things like Monte Carlos. I did 5 Monte Carlos. and came second in one that we were very pleased with, only just beaten by the Works Opel team. So that was nice. And then with racing as well, I did take part in some of the early races, but I was always using my TR2, and my TR2 was just what it was. And the likes of Darryl and Steve and Pete Cox, as they moved on, I remember in the early days I would invariably be fourth, with Pete Cox being fourth or third or fifth, and then Pete would move up and I'd move steadily down to the back of the field as everybody actually got their cars totally sorted and had them prepared as race cars. So to a large extent, the events that I've tended to do have been ones where you can use a car which you can drive on the road and you can use it for a variety of different things. And typically the TR5 that I use, the blue one, which we've just come back from using on the Targa Tasmania rally, where we're pleased to say, having built it to compete in that event, we'd built it as a standard car to run to their standard rules in Australia, and we'd built it to win the classic section, which we did. So we came first in class, got a Targa plate and won the classic section. So we were very pleased with that. But also we can take the car over to Barbados and do stage rallies over there. And we won King of the Carnival there in 2017 with daughter Natalie running it too. Likewise, you can take it to Malta and do the Grand Prix in Malta in exactly the same car, in exactly the same spec. And I run 1-2 races there too with the same car. So in fact, if anybody is ever thinking of having a go, just use the car that you've got, because that blue TR5, we go on holiday with it, and we use it for all that sorts of competition as well, including hills and sprints too. So you can use your standard car. Admittedly, you've got to have a cage in it, but you can use your relatively standard car and have good fun and get some good results.
And of course, all those lessons that you learned from racing and competing with TRs, you then put into the products that we all know you're famous for through Revington TR, that are responsible for so many cars going much quicker than they ever should have done.
Well, that's true, and I think the suspension is the big thing that we've always thought is the important thing, because if you can get the car to go around corners twice as fast as it used to be able to, you don't need an engine that's twice as fast, because you can just simply go around the corners rather quicker. So all those products that we've developed over the years have come from competing and for me wanting to go quicker and for our customers to go quicker. And there's no doubt that being in part of the Hill Climb and Sprint Championship and the other events has meant that we've had a platform, if you like, to develop them.
Neil, thanks for those lovely memories of those early days of the Hill Climb and Sprint Championship and how Revington TR has grown out of those lessons that you learned.
It certainly has.
And ladies and gentlemen, Neil Revington. Well, that brings us to the present day, and the current coordinator of the Sprint Hill Climb Championship, Roger McEwen. Wow, you've got a list on your hands now, haven't you, Roger? The most number of entries ever in history.
Yeah, it's gone from being good to being fantastic. This year we actually hit 40 entries into the championship. When I started, we were running 16 to 18. So in 18 years I've been doing it, we've achieved really a great success. Due to a number of things, we've introduced a class specifically for road-going cars with minor modifications, so the sort of general day-to-day car that most people have got. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we opened the championship up to any Triumph. So we've now, with wheels, with 4 wheels, not motorbikes. So we have Dolomites, Sprints, GT6s, Spitfires, etc., all taking part as well within the remit of the championship. And there are a number of highlights for me. There's the highlight that John Whedon entered the first hill climb in 1985, and he's still competing today, and I think that's an amazing achievement. Not in the same car, I hasten to add. Unfortunately, his TR4 got burnt out about 15 years ago. I also remember Hugh Maund, who was my predecessor. He drove a very, very fast TR7 V8 race car, and he holds every single record at every circuit that we drive at. and yet he never won the championship. And that really is something fantastic. So it's been great, and I hope that it will continue. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as it used to be in terms of organising events, and I actually don't see that the register will ever be able to organise its own events like it did at Kerber and at Goodwood 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's just not possible. The organisation and the regulations just would not allow it. But we get invitations from every club that's organising events, because after Ferraris, we are the second most invited club to events, because spectators love seeing TRs. So, you know, I'm really positive about the future of the championship and the way it's going to move.
Brilliant. Well, Roger, you've done a brilliant job in taking it through to modern times with the support, of course, of Revington TR, who make sure that we've got enough money to do all that we need to do. So thanks for that, Roger, and carry on the good work. Roger McEwen. So that, ladies and gentlemen, are our stars of motorsport. There are many more we're going to talk to tomorrow in more detail. If you competed in the championships, any of them, just give us a little wave. I can see Frank over there. There's Martin. There's some over there. So, oh, Jeff Mansfield, of course, with his legendary TR3A. Brilliant. Well done to you all in putting TRs at the forefront of motorsport. A big hand.